my name is Jonathan Swift, the Editor-in-Chief of Insurance Age and Insurance Post, and welcome to COVIDcast episode number 5. Now, there's certainly one topic which has hogged the headlines in relation to insurance and COVID-19 over recent weeks, and that is business interruption. More specifically, insurers paying hardball with claimants in terms of their claims. So it would be remiss of us not to cover this subject. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm delighted to say, to help me discuss this, I have a Concordia Consulting Chairman and a past President of the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters, Paul May, although I have to say he's not speaking on behalf of the CILA today, and also Questgates Head of Major Loss, Mike Ledgerton. Welcome, gentlemen.
Right.
So if I come to you, first of all, Mike, it's often said that the devil is in the detail. So why do you think there is so much confusion presently in terms of business interruption claims and COVID-19? I mean, to the layperson out there, they probably think a business is interrupted, therefore they should have the claim paid.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they do, and with no offence intended to anyone who listens to this, I think there is a basic lack of understanding on the part of policyholders about policy coverage generally, but more particularly business interruption insurance and the various extensions that may or may not apply to that. I mean, it is a highly technical area, and it taxes the brains of us that work in the industry quite often. So I'm not surprised that the general public don't have that level of understanding and look at it in more simplistic terms. I think also that the government did send out a few mixed messages initially about what actions they were taking and how that may be enough to trigger BI covers. And I know that the ABI and BIBA and others were very quick to sort of clarify that. And I think the government has since acknowledged that most policies won't have the cover, but it just all adds into that area of confusion and people seeing mixed messages. So I'm not surprised that there is confusion out there.
Paul, you're somebody who's worked in the insurance industry for about 45 years, 42 as a loss adjuster, and you're now handling COVID claims in the UK overseas. How does this compare with previous kind of major incidents in terms of the stance of insurers?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that we haven't really got any clarity. That tends to come later. I think what we've got at the moment is a lot of messy information with a lot of different organisations all wondering who's going to make the first move or who's going to say something that will come back and hurt them. The interim CEO of the FCA wrote to insurers, and I think he drew quite a nice distinction between large, sophisticated organisations and smaller firms, and he referred to the Financial Ombudsman's area, which is turnover below 6.5 million and less than 50 employees. I think if the messy problem was at least split into a 2-box by 2-box matrix, you'd have those ombudsman companies who may or may not have some sort of notifiable disease cover. And then you have the large, sophisticated, possibly well-resourced companies, probably with a broker advising them and maybe even a full-time risk management function. And they may or may not have notifiable disease type cover. So I think you could use a first filter, I guess, to find those 4 categories. And I think you talk about the lay person. I think almost certainly the lay person resides within the business with less than 50 employees and a turnover less than 6.5 million. So I think that's the group that needs help from the city minister, who's been very silent, the ABI, who have said a few things but not really terribly helpful, and so I feel that the layperson, who really in that 6.5 million turnover below category has the ombudsman as a long stop. I think one of those businesses should get their claim up and running litigate it through the insurance company and get the ombudsman to make a decision, and possibly even agree with the insurer that it will be fast-tracked, so that for the businesses in that very critical area where they don't have resources they can call and shareholders they can tap, that those businesses get the benefit of a financial ombudsman decision now rather than in 2026, where I think most of them will start to come out if past performance is anything to go by.
And Paul, do you think there is a possibility that there could be other claims outside BI further down the line, such as on loss of attraction? I think it's something that's been highlighted.
Well, I most definitely think there will be other claims. There is still debate, particularly if you look at American case law, as to whether the presence of the virus in the premises, on the surfaces, is property damage. You've got directors and officers covers where directors are going to be asked by shareholders, did you pay enough attention to protecting this business from this risk? There'll be the inevitable medical malpractice claims, and possibly some products liability claims, but certainly denial of access, loss of attraction. I'm happy to share this one very much with Mike, but loss of attraction tends to reduce the recoverability under the policy because the entire area where the business is based has lost footfall or tourists, and therefore their budgets would have to be dramatically reduced. And it would be those reduced budgets that the loss adjusters would look at when seeing how much the loss was. So I think loss of attraction is one of those surprises that a lot of people are starting to come across who haven't had dealings with cat type claims in the past.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo pretty much all that Paul said. I think you say at the moment the important thing and what will change, it will be a game changer, is if the courts and the ombudsman or anybody do actually come down and widen the definition of what constitutes damage. If it was to come that the presence of a virus in the premises did constitute physical damage, then obviously that opens up coverage under standard the core BI covers, not just relying on extensions necessarily. Then so that's I know that there are obviously cases already before American courts, and there was one in the Canadian courts recently sort of dealing with those issues, and I say that really could widen the field for a lot more claims if that definition was amended.
Can I ask? I mean, do either of you have any sympathy? And I'll come to you, Mike, with the line that's trotted out by insurers that this is because of the fact that pandemics are unpredictable, they're unforeseeable, they cannot be modelled, and essentially they do not follow the kind of line of other risks, the kind of idea that the losses of the few pay for the others, the masses. I've heard the example being used that this is like ultimately the whole of the UK being flooded as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I see the point they're making. I understand the point being, working in the insurance industry and, having done so for over 30 years. So I can see the point they're making. I doubt there's much sympathy for that viewpoint in the wider population who won't see that. But yeah, I mean, it is an impossible risk to underwrite, and ultimately, if all insurers did underwrite it, we'd all be paying an awful lot more for our policies. But I mean, in the end, whether they intended to cover it or they didn't intend to cover it, it comes down to how policies are worded and how they're drafted, and if there is any ambiguity there, then obviously it counts in against the drafter, against the insurer, and in favour of the policyholder. So yeah, there is. I mean, I see the point, but whether there's sympathy for that argument, I don't think there is in the wider population.
Paul?
Well, I think sympathy is one of those words that most people on the pavement wouldn't attribute to the insurance industry or loss adjusters. I think empathy is definitely what we're good at, and I think you know, all the loss adjusters that are actively involved at the moment, some wandering around with, you know, PPE on to keep things moving, will definitely have empathy with the policyholders, because, you know, we're all employees at the end of the day, and businesses want to succeed and grow. I think the risk is that insurers who have resources are going to be seen to fail to stand up and explain. You know, communication normally solves about 90% of any problem, and in this situation, the insurers are almost kind of, you know, gloves over their face in the corner of the ring, taking it from the press and everybody else, rather than seeking to create an impartial kind of forum to discuss. You know, there is no pot of gold. We've seen that with the government's attempts to support and help people. So I think there are covers there. This pandemic, although we say we've never seen it before in the UK, you know, we've seen it in Asia, we've seen it in Africa. There are some pretty strong recommendations in documents going back 15 years advising governments to prepare more. So I think the big problem actually is going to be when the country gets a cyber hit. We won't be able to have calls like this. People will start looking at the cyber wordings in their policies. So I think COVID-19 will actually be a good practice for people to look back at their policies and see what their cyber wordings say, because without the cyber, you know, without electricity and IT infrastructures, we really are locked in at home, aren't we?
Crikey, God forbid. Paul, what about the role of brokers here? I mean, you know, we obviously a lot of brokers are there to give an advice sale to these people in many circumstances, and basically make sure that the coverage that's being included is effectively worded. I mean, are brokers potentially in the firing line here? And what about those insurers that have sold policies direct? Going back to your kind of, I suppose, those would be your clients in the lower end, the kind of the very, very small SMEs, I suppose, the micro employees.
I think I really think that's the way to look at it. You know, that 6.5 million horizontal line and the with or without a cover wording. You would expect the 6.5 million turnover or less organisations to be so busy running their own businesses, whatever they are or were, to rely quite strongly on advice. Or even on a package type policy. I'm sure a lot of these organisations have a almost off the shelf wording, and some may have bought direct because it looked like a best of breed product, and it may well have had the most cover available. I think it's not just brokers and advisors, but, you know, even the boards of slightly larger organisations that have obligations, and their auditors that have obligations to review their risk exposures, the probabilities and the effects of something happening. They're in the frame. I suspect that a lot of shareholders will begin to ask questions about how their boards dealt with this risk, because in the public domain there are some very clear documents and advisory reports that show that were this to happen, certain steps should be taken and certain precautions. So I think it's wider than just brokers, and I'm pretty sure if it's an off-the-shelf policy where the insured hasn't had external advice, they've probably relied quite heavily on the insurance company to sell them a best of breed product.
Mike.
Yeah, I mean, you covered it very well. I mean, I think the issue is it just, you know, but the brokers are in the firing line and always depend on the level and the type of advice that they're given or should be expected to provide, and the duty of care to their clients in terms of arranging their insurance. I mean, the one point that would make, obviously, if products aren't out there, you know, at affordable levels to cover pandemics in the market, then brokers can't sell them. So if there's a shortage of supply, then it's, you know, you can't necessarily, you can't blame the brokers for that, but again, it's about what advice and the type of advice and that they provide to the clients. And as Paul says, it will depend on the type of business and as to how much advice they need from a broker or would expect a broker to provide. So it's a difficult one, but I think I'm sure a lot of brokers are feeling under an awful lot of pressure at the moment with the many calls from policyholders asking why aren't their policies responding to this. And so it's not an easy time to be a broker, I wouldn't have thought.
So the final question, Mike, is how do you see this all, I suppose, ending? I mean, do we think the government and regulator will get involved, or to Paul's point, do we think it might take a test case? It might, getting the FOS involved in some way?
Yeah, I think probably yes to all of the above, really. I mean, it's hard to look into the crystal ball and see where it's all going to end, but I think obviously the FCA have written to the CEOs of insurers, although I think that was more along the lines of, if claims are covered, pay them quickly, rather than going into the realms of pay for claims that clearly aren't covered. But whether the government, will intervene, I'm sure that they will come under pressure to do so, and how that will work out. And I know, obviously, in other parts of the world, the government have already done that. In US states, I think in France, and that they've started making moves to to involve the insurance industry more in that. The FOS, and again, it's something Paul touched on earlier. I think it would be helpful. A lot of these claims are going to end up with the FOS, I'm sure, and it would be good if they could get there sooner, and the FOS could give some guidance on specific issues and how they will view them, which would then help us to deal with those issues and prevent a lot more going to the FOS, because we've already because we'll have the guidance from them. So I think I don't think we've certainly not seen the end of it, and and I probably would be surprised if the government don't step in, at least at some level. And then going forward, whether there's there's been talk, and I know the insurance industry looking at sort of muted the point of making some sort of pool-re arrangement in respect to pandemics, and whether that will be the way going forward. Obviously that doesn't help with the current situation, but it might then at least make the cover more widely available to to people to buy.
Paul?
Well, there's a couple of things really. Mike and I are used to having our diaries disrupted every day by something new and urgent coming in, and getting into someone else's messy problem and trying to help them sort it out. The letter that the FCA sent to insurance company CEOs was sent on the 15th of April, 3 weeks after the lockdown. And I'm not going to read it all out, but there are a couple of bits I'd just like to alert the viewers of this discussion to. One thing that Mr. Woolard said was, if there are reasonable grounds to pay part of a claim, but not to make the payment of such claims in full, and this is addressed to the insurers, we would like you and your board to adopt an approach of making an interim payment. So big encouragement to say, if you feel you're liable, make a payment, even if it's a small one. At least it reassures the policyholder. Then the discussions can move on, of course, to loss of attraction and what the real budget income might have been. But secondly, he says, if you disagree with doing so, please send us the grounds for reaching that decision, including how you believe it represents a fair outcome for customers. Your firm's decision is likely to help inform our assessment of its culture. Well, I'm not quite sure what that last sentence means, and I'd be very interested to know if the FCA has had any information over the last week and a half from insurers that have decided they're not going to meet these claims. And perhaps my final request would be for the FCA to be transparent and publicize some of this thinking that's going on in those two camps. If you're making interim payment, why? If you're not paying, why? Let them guide us. That's what they're there for.
Okay, well, this subject is obviously going to rumble on for some months yet, but I'd like to thank Paul and I'd like to thank Mike for your time. Thank you very much. As I said at the start, this is This is part of an ongoing series, so please stay tuned for further episodes, and I'm sure we'll do another one on BI shortly. But until then, stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.